second speaker is Mukund, who is also an IITian from IIT Bombay and has a PhD from Stanford. Mukund is a very qualified person, an expert on aging, and leads organizations such as Sukham, who are focused on helping people uh, deal with uh, preparing for life transitions, aging. He's also founder and executive director of Sandhya's Touch, which provides grants to improve the quality of life of patients dealing with serious illness. So as you can see, he is kind of an expert in aging and would be the one kicking off today's discussion with the presentation. Then we'll have a small presentation by Paritosh, and then finally we will have a panel discussion where you all can join us as well. So with that, I will invite uh, Mukund Acharya to start his presentation.
So thank you, Yash, for that introduction. I guess Paritosh, Yash called me an expert in the field. I don't quite know if I would subscribe to that definition, but I think he raises a valid point. Before I begin my presentation, I want to spend a few minutes and try to answer the question that's likely going through the minds of some of you, as who is this Mukund, and why is he here talking about these subjects? And I think my short answer is it's about lived experiences. It's about the experiences I've had in my life and continuous learning that I've attempted to do, and I still plan to do. So when you put those two things together, I would say I've developed a body of knowledge, information, experience that sort of qualifies me to share some of my thoughts with you folks. As Yash pointed out, by training, I'm an engineer and scientist. I spent about 40 years in the aerospace arena, mostly in R&D. I was in academia, I was a professor, spent a lot of time in industry doing technology development and so on and so forth. But there came a point in my life when I decided I wanted to leave engineering and start to do what I'm doing. And I'll kind of indicate three incidents in my life that point to why I'm doing what I'm doing. In my late 20s, I'd finished at Stanford and I was working here at NASA when I at my mom found out from my mother that my dad wasn't doing well. So I returned to India. My wife and I, we were just married then. We returned to India to help my mom look after my dad. For a few years, we helped her as much as we could, but we watched her being an active caregiver for my father. Fast forward many years, over the past, for about 7 or 8 years, I became a caregiver for my wife, for Sandhya, and watched her as she worked through her illnesses, watched her as she worked through the medical system, was her caregiver on a full-time basis. Caregiving and work was all I did. And I learned a lot in the process. I learned about the medical system. I learned what it takes to be a patient, what it takes to be a caregiver, and so on. And then a year or so after my wife passed, I had a stroke. And so I was a patient in a hospital, in an emergency room. I spent almost 6 weeks when I couldn't use my right hand. I forgot how to brush my teeth. I couldn't write. I had to go through occupational therapy to get back into where I am. As you can see, I'm, thank the powers that be, fully recovered and active and so on. But that's another experience that sort of gives me, I guess, shall I say, the ability to talk about the kind of things I'm going to address to you today. I'm going into this in a little detail because it's important for you who is listening to think about my life experiences in the context of your own life experience and your family members' life experience. So you can put that in the context and learn from that, just as you will hopefully learn a little bit from what I'm going to share with you today. So over the past 8 years, I've taken off my engineer's hat and put on what I'd call a social entrepreneurship hat. I founded and co-founded two different nonprofit organizations. Sukham is one that I'll talk about to some extent today. But I'm also involved extensively with Stanford Hospital, with the hospice. I do teaching on a number of different fronts, and so on and so forth. And so I'm in a continuous learning process through these experiences and build on the knowledge base that I have to continue to serve the community, which is my passion now, by educating them, educating people, empowering people to be the best they can be, regardless of what they have. So with that, I want to then now spend 2-3 minutes talking about Sukham, and then we can get into the presentation. So Sukham is a very small, all-volunteer nonprofit that we founded. A bunch of friends, about 8 or 10 of us, are active in this field, in this venture. And our goals are to empower, educate, and enable our community members to help themselves and help their family members deal with the process of aging. Aging is going to hit all of us, right? And along the way in aging, we have to deal with what we call life transitions, events that sometimes disrupt our lives in ways that we had not imagined. And so by being better informed, better empowered, better enabled to react to those things when they happen, none of us know what's going to happen to us, but just getting a general sense of how to react to these events helps us then deal with those personal and family difficulties, disruptive events, situations when they happen. So we do not perform any direct service at Sukham, but we provide resources. If you go to our website, sukham.org, and I'll put it in the chat later, you can take a look if you haven't already done so. We provide different curated resources in a wide range of fields covering that sort of a topic. But we also deal one-on-one with people to help them address their particular problems. And on a fairly regular basis, one of us get calls or an email or something saying, hey, I have this situation. What do you recommend I do? How can I, where do I go? What do I do? And we try and help out with those things. So we're in the community. We're here to stay. We'll grow as people join us and want to join the effort and learn and help others. I just want to let you know that we are there for you. And the tagline that Sukham has, age well, live healthy, age well, find peace and joy, find Sukham, sort of embodies the spirit and what we're trying to do. And you'll find that tagline sort of permeates through everything that we do. We should not ignore the possibilities that there could be serious issues that happen in your lives. It certainly happened in mine. But we should nevertheless do everything we can to be informed, be ready when things happen. Planning is key, right? And then we go ahead and live life and enjoy it to the fullest and have the best life we can given the circumstances we have. So that's our philosophy. So given that, I'd like to now launch into this short presentation that I have. I hope you can see this, right? So
yes, we can see it. Mukund, will you be sharing this presentation with the audience?
I can certainly send for those who request it, send a PDF of this to others later. Not a problem at all.
Thank you.
So we're talking about growing old in America, and I'm talking about America because almost all of us in this call presumably are here, most of us in the Bay Area. And the focus of this is going to be on aging and caregiving, right? So let's talk about aging. Aging is not an event. It's a continuous process. It cannot be stopped. It's inexorable. And so if you look at this handsome young dude in the bottom here, you know, he started out in his life with in the arms of his parents, and somehow he made it into IIT Bombay and had a good. It used to be 5 years back then, guys. When I was at IIT, had a good 5 years at IIT Bombay. He then moved on and at one point had shoulder length hair and had fun in grad school. And then all of a sudden time passed, and before he knew it, life had sort of moved past him, and he doesn't look anything the way he looks now. He doesn't look anything like he used to right now, right? So aging happens to everybody. It's how you deal with it that counts. And the thing is, on a day-by-day basis, we don't pay any attention to it until something happens, right? And I'm using that something in my life to modify my the way I've lived life. And the message I'm giving you is that's what we all need to do. So let's talk a little bit about aging and what happens, right? What happens when it's aging? A lot of good things in our lives, right? But I want to focus on the things that that we are here to talk about. Aging almost invariably brings with it some health conditions related to the fact that we're growing older, right? And with it is a high probability of some kind of illness, big or small, either chronic or serious illness, right? And that's the reality, likelihood of dementia, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, right? And for many of us, with time, decreased independence and decreased mobility. So what does all this mean? It means that not only are we impacted in the way we can do things, what we can do, what we can't do anymore, but it also has a big impact on our friend and family circle. And that's one thing we all need to keep in mind, right? So how do we deal with these changes, not only in our own lives, but in the lives of our family and the friends, those of us whom we care for, people in our community, right? Before we get to that, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the two phrases I threw at you: chronic disease and serious disease, right? A serious illness is a health condition with a high risk of mortality. When I was 10, I got severe jaundice. I ended up in a coma for a week or 10 days. I woke up, didn't know where I was, what I was doing, but I recovered. I came back to it 100%, right? It was a serious illness, an acute illness, but it was not chronic. But many serious illnesses commonly affects patients for several years. And the examples of that would be cancer that's come back, metastasized, metastatic cancer, heart failure, COPD, dementia. These are all chronic conditions. These are all can be serious conditions, right? So serious illness, while it has a high risk of mortality, can be chronic. You can have a chronic condition that does not right now have a high risk of mortality, but nevertheless, it's something that you deal with. So a chronic illness, on the other hand, is defined as something that is going to last at least a year, probably more, and it requires some ongoing medical attention. That's one thing. And the second thing is it somehow limits the way you'd like to live your life, limits what we call activities of daily living. So it either limits your life or requires medication, or typically both. Okay. So we're going to be, as we age, dealing with these two kinds of illnesses, right? And I'm going to now throw a few statistics at you, not to show you numbers or give you data, because data is always helpful and we engineers like data, but to ask you to, as you look at those numbers, look at it in the context of your own family circle, your own friend circle, to see if you can relate with some of them, right? And some of these statistics, when you absorb them, can be pretty, how shall I put it, overpowering. 6 in 10 adults in the US have a chronic disease. And more than 50% of them, 4 in 10, have 2 or more chronic diseases. And you can see across the bottom, heart disease, cancer, chronic lung disease, strokes, Alzheimer's disease, diabetes, kidney disease, and so on. There's a huge list. Here's some of them, right? Now, so almost 200 million Americans live with at least one disease like heart disease, stroke, cancer, diabetes. And more than 50% of them have at least 2, but more than 2 of these chronic conditions, right? It's not just adults. 20% of kids under the age of 17 are limited by at least one chronic disease disability. I'm sure many of you listening to this know of a family dealing with a child who has an issue that they have to take to care for, right? And as you grow older, these numbers are a little dated, but 80% of elders have at least one chronic disease.
What was that?
Right? And so these diseases are the leading cause of death and disability in the US, right? And no surprise to those of you involved in finance and so on, they're also the leading driver of healthcare costs in this country. And healthcare costs in this country impact all of us in multiple ways. So let's, if I may ask everybody who's not on mute, please to go on mute, that would be helpful. Thank you. So let's look at some of these diseases briefly. You have among the Medicare population, typically over 65, although there are many people who are under 65 who also qualify for Medicare because of their illnesses. Among the Medicare population, there's a steady increase of the number of people with these chronic diseases, and leading them is hypertension, high blood pressure, hyperlipidemia related to cholesterol and triglycerides, arthritis, diabetes, ischemic heart disease, kidney disease, and at the bottom, depression. Very few people think about depression as a disease, very few people think about it as a chronic disease, but mental illness is one of the leading issues that we're struggling with, right? And so that is also increasing in alarmingly high numbers. So these are some of the things that are happening in the population. These are some of the things that are happening in our South Asian population, in our Indian population, and we need to be cognizant and aware of that. Alzheimer's and dementia are things we know something about. Alzheimer's disease is expected to triple to about 14 million people in this country within the next 20 years, right? Right now, more than 6 million people are living with it today. And this is one of the types of diseases that cause dementia. There's several other dementias, diseases, and that's subject for a different talk. But currently, Alzheimer's is the 6th leading cause of death in the US, according to the CDC. So you can see that illnesses related to that we normally don't think about it the same way we think about cancer and so on, are amazingly quite high up there in the impact that they have on the population here. Okay. And at least 15 or 20% of people 70 and above suffer from some kind of dementia. Okay. The costs of these uh, these dementias are staggering. 90% of the nation's healthcare budget, is due to, according to CDC, for chronic and mental health conditions, right? And that impacts our own healthcare costs after a while, right? Now, this is something that I think all of us need to pay attention to. As South Asians, we have a significantly higher risk for what's called cardiometabolic diseases, which is a combination of stroke, diabetes, and heart disease, right? If you look at this chart on the left, compared to white, Asians, Chinese, white, Chinese, Japanese, and Filipino population, we are almost 4 times higher probability to have a cardiovascular event like a heart attack or a stroke. And if you think, this is only going to happen when we're older, right? That's not quite true. If you look at the chart on the right side, 25% of the heart attacks among Indians occurs before the age of 40. 1 in 4 Indians who has a heart attack has it before the age of 40. And those numbers keep rising to 40% at the age of 40, 50% at the age of at the age of 55, it's almost 60%, and so on, right? So you have these disruptive events that happen in our lives, in the lives of our families, lives of our friends, and so on. So what happens when we are ill or unwell or unable to do everything for ourselves? Who looks after us, right? A caregiver. So the idea of caregivers and caregiving is a crucial topic that we all need to think about and understand, right? Some of you may remember one of our presidents of the US was a gentleman by name Jimmy Carter. His wife, Rosalind Carter, the first lady of the US back then, this was in 76 through 80, after they left the White House, started the Rosalind Carter Institute for Caregiving in Georgia, a very nice institution that supports the communities. And she has a quote that I like a lot. She says, there are only 4 kinds of people in this world: those who have been caregivers, those who currently are caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who need caregivers. So caregivers are going to drive an envelope around our lives. Right? And so I want to give you some information on caregiving in the US. This is from a research report put out by the AARP and the NAIC every 5 years. The latest one is from 2020. And I want to give you some ideas of caregiving in the US. And again, look at these in the context of your family situation, your friend situation. More than 1 in 5, 21% have provided care to an adult or child with special needs sometime in the past year, right? 53 million adults are family caregivers, and that's an increase of 22% in the past 5 years. About 1/4 of them care for 2 people or more, and that's an increase of 1/3 in the past 5 years. And these numbers are prior to the pandemic, and these numbers just risen dramatically in the pandemic. These are 2020 data, right? No surprise to anyone here. Some of us might find this number low, but 61% of all caregivers are women. It's the women in our lives that make our families work, right? For the most part. And what's the average age of a caregiver? It's 49 years. 1 in 10 caregiver goes to college, is getting an education while looking after a family member. Okay. Some more statistics. Most people care for a relative. 90% care for a relative. You care for a parent or parent-in-law, 50%. A lot of you on this call are probably in this situation or will be in this situation. 12% care for a spouse or partner, 8% care for a grandparent or a grandparent-in-law, and there's a sizable percentage who care for an adult child who's unable to look after herself or himself. Right? And I personally know families, Indian families, that fit each one of these categories. And it's not just family. 1 in 10 cares for a friend or neighbor. And we'll talk about what caring for means, right, in just a second. And as you grow older, you don't go scot-free. 75% of caregivers age 75 or older care for someone who's also as old as them or older than them. So the senior population looks after itself as well the best way it can. And majority of the caregivers, though, are in the 18 to 50 age group who are caring for someone who are older than they are. So what do these caregivers do? There's something called the activities of daily living, instrumental activities of daily living, which is balancing a checkbook, driving a car, going to the bank, and so on and so forth. Almost 100% of caregivers help a person with what's called the instrumental activities of daily living, things that they're no longer able to do them for themselves for one reason or the other. There's also another category called activities of daily living. Think of this as you get up in the morning, you brush your teeth, put on your clothes, take a shower, put on your clothes, right? Tie your shoes on. All the things that you do to look after yourself. You feed yourself, right? All of those activities, daily living, 60% of caregivers have to help somebody with one or more of those, being unable to look after themselves in some respect. So almost that same number perform some medical or nursing tasks. Managing medicines, as you get older, not knowing what medication to take, when to take it, how to take it, it becomes a big problem, and that's critical to health. So 80% of caregivers manage medications for other people. And if you're seeing this specialist, that therapist, that doctor, and so on, you have to coordinate the care across multiple providers. That requires work in our system. Half of the people do that kind of work. And often we also ask the children in our house, members in the community, to help us carry out our healthcare talks. Right? So there's a crisis of caregiving developing because of the aging of the US, especially in our family system, but in general in all of American family system, the health, social, economic, and long-term support care is completely dependent on family caregivers. If family caregivers were to stop, the entire US economy would grind to a halt, right? Caregivers provide 37 billion hours of unpaid work annually. And if you add that to the GDP, GDP would go up by 3 or 4 points. $500 billion of unpaid work, right? And we continue to step up and we say, I'm going to help my family and friends and neighbors because I want to do that. They are my people, right? And so we keep doing this, but how long is that system going to survive without a crack here, without a break there, right? Without a failure here and there. We as a country are continuing to age. Countries like Japan are worse off than we are, but US is not too far behind. So the need to support our caregivers, who are the cornerstone of our society, can only become more and more important. We as a community, we as a society, we as a local, state, or federal or organization need to put some effort into this. So they say this 24-hour personal care need is steadily going up in this country, and some people even call it a tsunami, a slow-moving tsunami that has no end. It's there for us. So there's a cost for all our families. We've talked about the cost to the community, cost to the economy. but it's for the families, it's not just a societal and financial burden, but it impacts us in tremendous ways. There's disruptions to life, to family relationships. Caregiving sometimes tears siblings apart. You did this, I didn't do that, right? Lifestyle changes. We have to make changes in our social life to be able to look after the people at home. It impacts the way we work. Sometimes we have to quit a job, do something part-time. It impacts our professional careers. And overlaying on this, there's a stress because we lack the knowledge and awareness and understanding that help do our caregiving job better. That's where someone like organization like Sukham can come in. We can provide that little extra layer of support to you by giving you the knowledge to empower yourself and enable yourself to do whatever it is need to do better. So chances are you will need to be cared for, or you can become a caregiver. So you have to, what do you have to do? You have to plan, you have to be prepared. And that's sort of the subject of what we have want to talk about. Now, we at Sukham, we have a lot more to share with you. What I've showed you today, as I mentioned at the beginning, is just kind of an overview, but there are a number of topics that I've listed here, and each of these can form a separate session on this LifeX group if there's interest in that. In fact, I would encourage you, if there's a topic that you see here that you want to hear more about, put it in the chat or get in touch with me, get in touch with any of the IITBA folks, and we can certainly help you organize. But we are ready to talk to you about any number of topics, including the ones here. We have actually presentations that we can provide for you. You know, understanding palliative and hospice care is becoming more and more important. Planning, advanced directives, how to care for caregivers, all of those things are important for us, right? So some of your questions we may be able to address in the panel discussion today, but if there's interest, I'm certainly willing to come back and talk to you a lot more about these. In the meantime, though, as I mentioned at the outset, please do visit the Sukham website, sukham.org, or you can reach out to me either through the Hacks group, or you go to the website and you on the contact me page, it'll come to me, and I can certainly address your questions on a one-on-one basis. So with that, I think I'll stop here and stop my share, and we can get to